This week we're covering 20 some hours of classes. So we'll tonight we'll wrap up the applied meditation course at the top level.
This is the last class
For meditation course, and then next week we'll get into course 4, which is proof of future lives. And then we'll spend 2 weeks on proof of future lives, and then we'll spend another 2 weeks on karma and how karma works. So we have 4 or 5 weeks after this class in this series. But first, a little opening prayer meditation.
Sashi Koki Jushin Metotran Vira Lingshin Degen Padi Sangye Shindu Mite Vadi Drogun Nanda Shinla Trupasho Idam Buddha-mandalakam niyatayami Sangye Shudam Soki Choknamla Jonchu Bardu Dakni Japsuchi Daki Junyen Yipe Sonamki Roll up and cheer Sangye Drupasho Sangye Chudam Soki Choknamla Jonchu Bardu Dakni Yapsuchi Dohi Junyen Gipe Sonamki Roll up and cheer Sangye Drupasho Sangye Chudam Soki Choknamla Jonchu Bardu Dakni Yasuchi Dagi Junyen Gipe Sonamki Roll up and cheer Sangye Drupasho.
So we'll begin with just a few minutes of meditation to reposition the mind in a more neutral space and to shift gears from the activity and busyness of the day. So please sit with your spine straight and comfortable. We'll begin with just a breathing meditation, eyes comfortably closed. Let's focus on the sensation of the breath passing through the nostrils on the exhalation and inhalation. That being one cycle of breath, begin on an exhalation and just count 14 rounds of breathing. Try not to have any other awareness, just keeping your mind focused on the sensation of the air in the nostrils. your awareness to the space, the air in front of you, and imagine or visualize the holy being you feel closest to there. Try to see them clearly in your mind's eye or feel their presence with you. Think of some specific quality that you admire in them that you would like to have yourself. Reflect upon that quality and what it would be like to have perfected it yourself. What you would be like as someone manifesting and living from that place. Try to see yourself doing that. In your mind, imagine some beautiful, perfect offering that you can make to this holy being. Some gift or supplication, something to offer in supplication. And you can see yourself offering it and being received happily. Maybe a flower or rainbows or anything you find to be beautiful. Your own goodness, perhaps. And ask them from your heart and mind to teach you how to become like them. You can see or imagine them agreeing to do so. Think of your own goodness and recall your greatest goodness of the day today, whether it was something you did or said or thought. See it very clearly in your mind. You can offer that to them also. Offering of your own virtue. Think about your greatest negativity of the day. The most harmful thing you did or said or thought today. See it very clearly. Try to remember your motivation to help all beings. Try to feel some regret that you did the opposite. Especially that karmically this will come back to you and you will experience a similar problem again in the future. Resolve in your mind to restrain yourself from doing this for perhaps the rest of the evening, some finite, manageable period of time. Be very clear in setting your intention that you will not do it again for that period. And think of some specific positive activity you can do to offset the negative. Something manageable, simple. focus again upon the holy being you've invited here and ask them from your heart to stay with you and teach you and not leave, and to lead you to the end of your spiritual path to full enlightenment. And see them happily smiling and agreeing. And they come closer to you and move to the space above your head, becoming smaller and smaller as a glowing ball of light there, adorning you as a crown ornament. Just staying with you, blessing you. You feel their presence or visualize it, whatever is easier for you. So, homage to all holy beings, thank you for coming. So, in tonight's class, we're on to different material. We talked about last week, if we look back at the dozen classes we did in the original meditation series, the first 2/3 of it were really about how you meditate, your posture, obstacles that come up in meditation, antidotes to those obstacles, how to focus your mind. And so it's useful to know what problems might come up in meditation, because I think for most Americans, when they meditate, they think they're doing pretty well, and they never get past the first obstacle or two, primarily because they don't know what the classic obstacles to meditation are. For example, if you encounter subtle dullness in your meditation, you're kind of slightly spaced out and feeling good and got a little bit of a buzz on, you might not even know that you're in an unproductive meditative space. And we can spend years sort of feeling good, slightly buzzed out, slightly spaced out in meditation, and then we don't ever really move past that and make progress. And so we talked about all those things. If you know what the classic problems in meditation are, and what their antidotes are and how to overcome them, then you can move to higher levels of meditation. You can move to higher levels of realization, right? And a lot of these problems are sneaky because you think you're doing well when you're actually in the middle of the problem. Relaxing, feeling good, getting into a nice meditative space is, it seems to be a good meditation. When in fact, it's just a way to get stalled out, So we talked about all these things, and tonight we're going to talk about what you meditate on, the object of meditation. And in ancient Tibet, they were going through the same kinds of issues that we go through when we begin. They were trying to figure out how to meditate. They were trying to figure out what's the appropriate approach, what are the appropriate techniques and methods to meditate, and what should you meditate upon, right? So there were people coming in from the east, from China into Tibet. And these were Buddhist traditions that were older than Tibet. And there were masters coming up from the south, from ancient India, teaching on meditation and how to engage in Buddhist meditation. And once in a while, it wasn't common, but once in a while, there would be a conflict where opposing traditions would meet, and they'd have to hash it out to figure out what is true and what is false when you have opposing Buddhist positions, right? So it came to pass that there was a Chinese monk named Shuang who came in from China, who had a certain meditative position that he was widely teaching in Tibet. And then there was an Indian master who came up from India, whose name Master Kamarashila. And Master Shuang was teaching a meditation style which basically said you empty your mind, you relax, you try not to focus on anything. It's similar to a lot of things that have spread in the United States, which are derivative of that. And so the way they worked it out in the old days was they would have public debates. You would assemble the opposing masters of the opposing positions would assemble in front of the king and the population and the monasteries, and they would debate their positions and support their positions and attack each other's positions logically to prove who was correct. And then whomever was accepted as being correct, then the other party had to abandon their position and take on their opponent's view, along with all of their followers. So it was no small thing in the day where if you asserted something, you might have monasteries and thousands of followers who follow your position, and if you were defeated in public debate, then everybody converted to the other position. So in terms of meditation systems and the way of meditating, the proper way of meditating, this played out in Tibet, in ancient Tibet. And so there was a great meditation master named Kamalashila who won these debates and whose position was largely adopted in Tibet as the proper and appropriate way to meditate. And we study from his techniques and his methods and his teachings, right? So, they did the debate, and Hoshang's position is that you just empty your mind. And Master Kamalashila's position was that the nature of the mind is that it has to have an object. It's not possible to have an empty mind. Hoshang would say that the goal is to be peaceful, to empty your mind, to focus on not having an object in your mind. And so Master Kamalashila basically said, look, the nature of the mind is it has to have an object. That's how the mind functions. It's not possible for a functioning mind to be without an object. Even if you're thinking about, I'm not going to think about anything, that thought becomes the object of the mind. So to say, I'm not going to focus on anything is the object of the mind's focus, right? And so his position was it's impossible to ever have a mind which is empty and not focusing on something, right? So the mind is like a mirror, and anything that you put in front of it is reflected. And the mind is affected and takes on the qualities of what's put in front of it. So if the mind is exposed to holy things, the mind becomes like that. If the mind is exposed to negative things, the mind becomes like that. And so what we expose the mind to becomes very important in that regard. So that's the debate they had. Master Kamalashila would say, not only is the nature of the mind such that it must have an object, it must have content, right? But what's the point of having a meditation practice where you focus on nothing? What are you trying to accomplish? What is the ultimate goal? Why are you doing that? Why are you spending your life energy and your time on that, right? Say, if you just want to have a mind that doesn't focus on anything, knock yourself on the head with a rock. Why is that a meditative goal? To be thoughtless and to have an empty mind. There's no positive end goal and result of that practice, right? And his point being that you've got to have a goal if you're meditating. You've got to have some positive result that you're striving for. Okay, so and you see this even now. You talk to people and they say, "Oh, I was on a great retreat. I did this wonderful retreat. I went to a retreat center. The food was really good. We got up early to meditate. We sat for a long time during the day. We get up, we do walking meditations. And then you say, well, what did you meditate on? And it'd be like, well, whatever you want. They didn't really tell us what to meditate on. The point was to just be peaceful and to have a calm mind and to just relax and be happy, try not to think about anything. People do like a 3, 4, 5 day retreat like that, right? You see a hand halfway up. Deep
I'm
thought.
just thinking, based on the logic that this person utilizes to prove that the mind must have an object, this type of meditation could be effective.
Which type of meditation?
The one which is directionless.
Could be
Because you're
effective.
choosing your own direction by trying to assimilate into whatever sort of environment you are perceiving, and that becomes the object. So I'm going to be peaceful now, that's my object.
Mm-hmm. So the goal would be to be peaceful.
Right, or
And so-
whatever that they're creating in their own
Mhm.
mind, right?
Mhm.
So by virtue of his logic, wouldn't such a thing, even though it seems kind of silly,
Mhm.
couldn't it still be effective for practice?
So if I understand you, the question or the point is isn't it a good thing to be able to have a peaceful mind? And isn't it useful to practice to have a peaceful mind? that what you're saying?
That could be part of it. I mean, that's what these people maybe would argue if they've attended one of these retreats. But my point is that there was still an object, right?
Which is?
The one that they've defined for themselves in this kind of like aimless, nebulous format of a retreat.
Yeah. So if a person picks their own object, whatever it may be,
Right.
if I understand you, you're saying it may be beneficial,
Right.
it may be useful.
Yeah. Based on the logic.
To accomplish what? Or to what end?
Well, it depends because it's kind of like if the idea is to be peaceful and calm, that they're choosing that as an object. That's okay.
That wasn't it.
That's my morning alarm.
So, this is what we have to talk about tonight, which is the object of meditation, right? And so, Master Huashang and his followers would say, yeah, it is a goal to just have an empty mind, a clear mind, a mind which focuses on nothing. There is some point, there is some benefit to that, right? And so Master Kamalashila's position was, not really, because our goal in Buddhism is not to be peaceful, and our goal in Buddhism is not to be calm. Right? Our goal in Buddhism is to put a permanent end to all suffering and reach enlightenment. Right? So one's meditation practice is a tool to do that, to facilitate that. So is there a place, and is there a reason, is there a benefit to engaging in a meditation where one is just trying to calm down? Sure. One can't go from having an agitated mind to having a deeply focused mind without going through that process of stilling the mind. And so from a Master Kamalashila's perspective, one engages in meditations to calm the mind as an intermediate step to simply shift the mind into neutral, to disengage the wheels from spinning. We normally have the mind going on all sorts of stuff, right? Ordinary, mundane stuff. And so we have to disengage those gears and those wheels, calm the mind down, get it into a neutral space, so that we can then engage in proactive, whatever practice that we're defining and choosing to move to our goal, right? So it's a very important point, which is, why does one meditate? What's the purpose of meditation? What's the goal of meditation, right? And one could say, well, the purpose of meditation and the goal of meditation is to be calm. And there are many meditations which are taught like that, but that's not what Buddhist meditation is. Right? All Buddhist practice, including meditation, has the goal of putting an end to suffering, and reaching some higher state. And just being calm doesn't accomplish that. Not to mention that to be calm, one has to address their mental afflictions and collect the causes to have that type of mind. Right? One has to collect the karma causes to have a mind which functions in a peaceful, calm way. And one has to clean the negativities from one's mind, which arise as afflictions. Right? So we talked about it last week. Sitting down in meditation and saying, "I choose to be calm," is not going to produce a calm mind. Right? I don't know if that helps or not, but
it does. I was just kind of not trying to be difficult, but I was being difficult.
Okay. You want to say something?
Long past.
All right. So, from a Buddhist perspective, there are three different types of meditation three different classes or categories of meditation that one can engage in, right? And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. What we're going to talk about tonight is what do we focus our mind upon during meditation, right? If you're going to meditate, what's the object? If you've done any kind of retreat yourself, if you've had any kind of extensive practice in deep retreat, you especially see that no matter how much you try to still the mind, no matter how much you try to calm the mind, it's always looking for content. It's like a machine, that needs to be fed. It's like a beast that needs to be fed. Like, if you sit there, your mind is looking for something. Your mind wants to engage something. The mind wants to move. It needs content to process, right? And so The issue becomes, what do we provide the mind, and what do we give the mind, and what do we, how do we engage the mind? Given that the mind's nature is to have an object which it is focused upon, then what is the object that we provide to the mind so that it's productive and spiritual and working towards our enlightenment and spiritual evolution, right? So, anyway, so there are three types of meditation, and given that we have to have something to meditate on, it would be one of these three types of things. The first is called jokgom. Please say jokgom.
Jokgom.
And go means to meditate, and jok means to set your mind on an object one-pointedly. So, even in our regular worldly pursuits, success comes from a single-mindedness, right? A single-pointed concentration. If you're going to be a good ball player, or you're going to be a good programmer, or a good business person, you've got to have fairly single-minded focus upon what you're doing. You have to have fairly single-pointed focus upon what you're doing, or you won't get very far, right? I mean, you're not going to be the best player if you're not single-minded in your pursuit, and you're not really giving it a lot of time and energy and single-pointed focus, right? So, when we talk about this in meditation, it means to put your mind upon an object one-pointedly. It might be an image, it might be an idea. Like that deep emptiness meditation would be an example of single-pointed meditation, right? So it means a single-minded focus. Okay, fixing the mind on one object in the meditation. So people often ask, well, I'm just starting to meditate. What should my first object of meditation be? Where should I start? I'm new to meditation. I need an object to focus upon. What should I focus upon? In the scriptures, it typically says, take an image. Like take an image of a Buddha, for example, and start very simply. You start with just a silhouette, maybe like as if it were backlit, and you just see the outline. And so you sit and you try to visualize the outline very clearly, right? And after you become comfortable with that, after you get to be pretty good at that, then you start to fill in, you add an eye, and start to see the details of an eye clearly, and the other eye, and then you start to build the image, and you add the hair, and then continue on like that, right? And this active visualization is not meant to be a sort of a kind of a flat, dull process. It's meant to be very lifelike and very real and very vibrant. So it's, often I think when people meditate and say, oh, I'm going to meditate on a picture of a Buddha, you see a picture and then you meditate on a 2D thing. And it's like it's flat, and it's all blue, and there's no tone, right? And there's no movement. And so that's not what meditation is supposed to be like. Meditation is a process of engaging your mind fully in really in a multi-sensory way. So as you are building a visualization and you're developing this single-pointed meditation, you're seeing, if you're visualizing the Buddha, they're moving, their eyes are moving, they're breathing, you can feel their warmth, you can smell their scent, you can hear the sounds as they move or breathe. And so it's a full experience, an experience which is meant to be as real as possible. And as one becomes better and better at visualization and single-pointed meditation, then it should be very much like there's a real being there with you, right? So definitely not just a flat-colored picture, paper visualization, like you would see in a book. It's like, what would it look like to have a holy being in front of you, I mean, their arms move, their hair moves, all of it, right? So they blink, right? Something like that. So you should get to the point where you really feel like that they're there. So that's the idea of single-pointed visualization, right? And then secondly is, the second type is called shargom. Please say shargom.
Shargom.
What does gom mean?
Meditation.
Meditation, right. So shargom is a review meditation. It's where you're reviewing something. Okay? Reviewing what? Well, the way the mind works, it's like they have the studies of the brain. The more they say, if it fires, it wires, right? The more you think a thought, the more you form neural connections, the more you form neural bridges, right? And so thinking something over and over and over again causes the brain to function in a certain way, just as thinking something over and over and over again causes thoughts to arise in a certain way. Okay? And so doing a review meditation, it's exposing something to your mind over and over and over and over again to habituate the mind and to condition the mind to think a certain way. All right? And so, for example, should I be a Buddhist? Should I meditate? I mean, you think about one of the steps of the long run, like a death meditation. One could do a death meditation where there are 9 steps to a death meditation. You go through the 9 steps of the death meditation, which start with, I could die at any minute, and I don't know when. So by exposing this to the mind over and over and over again in meditation every day, one actually starts to be aware of it. One actually starts to think that way, and one actually starts to think, oh, I could die at any minute. Maybe I should really be careful about what I do with my time and my energy. Maybe I should really pick important things to spend my time on. Maybe I should engage in the highest possible pursuits that I'm able to engage in, rather than squandering my life on meaningless activities, right? So, what starts to happen is that the mind becomes conditioned and habituated to think that way, and so it affects our behavior, and it affects our life, and it affects how we relate to the world, right? So that kind of review meditation is very important to create new habits. Right? And then the third is qigong. Please say qigong.
Qigong.
And it's an analytical meditation. This is where we analyze something. We basically go through logical reasoning, lines of reasoning, to examine something and suss it out, and to say, all right, Buddhism teaches that the time of death is uncertain. Is that true? Do I know anyone where that's not been the case? And to simply take an idea that's presented to you philosophically and to check it out and to thoroughly, logically evaluate it, look at it from every angle, from every perspective, to tear it apart, to look at it up and down and all around, to decide, yes, that's true, or no, that's not true, right? And then what? After you've done that, and you come to a conclusion, then you hold that conclusion single-pointedly in your mind as an object of single-pointed meditation. So you go from the Qigong to the Chokgom. You go from the analytical meditation to the single-pointed concentration. And that's very typical in Buddhism. It says, all right, let me look at something, let me evaluate something, let me analyze something. This person's a holy being, or they're not a holy being, or they're an ordinary human being, whatever. Let me really analyze it. Let me really evaluate it. Let me really tear it apart and get clarity and come to a conclusion. And then once I come to the conclusion, then I hold my mind upon that for as long as possible to burn it in and to practice single-point concentration. So you have to get used to that. If you're meditating, you have to get used to this practice of shifting the mind from one state to another. And it's a very natural process when you meditate to go from an engaged mental process to a still single-pointed single-pointed focus with your mind, right? Because it's the nature of the mind is such that it's not going to be able to sit there and still single-pointed concentration, for however long. Maybe you're good for a minute, maybe you're good for 10 minutes, maybe you're good for 30 minutes. Whatever your capacity is, whatever my capacity is for single-pointed concentration, at some point the mind gets tired, or the mind wavers, or the mind gets bored, and it wants to move on to something else, right? And so that's the point at which you then shift gears and you say, okay, mind, you want to jump around, you want to be active, you want to be busy. Let's do some analytical meditation now. And so you can sit there and think your thoughts and check it out, and continue to have the appropriate content presented to the mind, the appropriate holy content presented to the mind as an object, and keep the mind engaged in holy things by alternating between analytical meditation and single-pointed concentration, right? So like that. And similarly with review meditation. The same thing with review meditation. You could review lines of reasoning, and after you finish reviewing the lines of reasoning, then you shift to single-pointed concentration, right? So that's the idea. Okay. So, analytical meditation is taking a certain question and putting it center stage in your mind, right? And really trying to debate it and come to a conclusion like, should I do this or should I do that when I get off my meditation cushion? Should I engage in this activity or should I engage in that activity? And it's wrestling with oneself internally, because the mind wants to do what's easy. The mind wants to do what it's habituated to. And so one has to really look at one's choices and say, should I engage in some wholly virtuous activity? Or should I go to a cafe? Or should I watch a movie? Or should I do perhaps an even more virtuous activity? And the mind will say, well, let's do this because it's easier. Or that would be more comfortable for me, right? Or I would prefer that. And, it's a challenge because the mind wants to do what's comfortable and convenient for the mind. But it's not necessarily the highest thing. It's not necessarily the most beneficial thing for oneself or anyone else, right? And so this process of analytical meditation is really a process of struggling with oneself and engaging with oneself and arguing with oneself, about what things are like or even what I should do. If the object of my meditation is what's the highest virtue I can do today, what's the most profound thing or the most spiritual thing that I can do today, the mind isn't going to necessarily like that. It's not going to necessarily easily go along with that. And so it's a real active process and it's a real active struggle, because the mind doesn't want to typically. The mind wants to do what it's used to and what it's familiar with and what it's habituated to, right? All right. So we're going to talk about Lamrim. Lamrim is a meditation that you can do the rest of your life. And if you ask what should I meditate about, Lamrim has all of the material that one would need to meditate about from a Buddhist perspective. And so we're going to go into that. Lam means path and Rim means steps. It's steps on the path. It's an instruction manual outlining the steps of the path to enlightenment. So it's basically follow these steps in this order and you'll become enlightened. Okay? It's just like an instruction manual for how to assemble your IKEA furniture that comes flat in a box, right? They ship it for their convenience and for their efficiency, and they give you the pictures and all the rest, and you've got to figure out how to put it together, how to make it work, right? I mean, it's like you do your income taxes, like you get your what's the download? It's TurboTax download. It's like, look, we'll give you all the windows, we'll give you all the menus, just go through it step by step, check every box, fill in every line. We guarantee by the time you get to the last page, your taxes will be done right, no question. Right? And Lamrim is the same way. It's like, follow these steps in this order, you'll get enlightened. Okay? It's like that. So if you do it correctly, it has to come out right. So some people would say, I would rather do it my way. I'd rather do a little of this, I'd rather do a little of that. I don't really want to do it in that order. I want to try this, and I want to try that. And, it doesn't work. I mean, the reason they provide an instruction manual is because it does need to be done a certain way for it to work. I mean, it's like if you're assembling, I don't know what, if you're a mechanic and you're putting a car engine together, it's like you have to put all the parts where they go for the engine to work properly. If you say, well, I want to put the carburetor in a different place, and I want to leave out one of the pistons, and maybe I don't really need to tighten that bolt all the way. It's not going to work. And spiritual things are the same way as ordinary things. If you try to undertake a spiritual path, a spiritual practice, you say, I'm going to do that halfway, and I'll leave that bit out, and I'll add something else in. It's not going to work. You're not going to get enlightened. It's just like a worldly thing or a mechanical thing, right? So if those things weren't necessary, they wouldn't be in the instruction manual. It's like, would you get an instruction manual to put your IKEA furniture together that would tell you to put a shelf in that wasn't there, right? Or give you screws that you don't need that are completely the wrong size. You'd be looking at it going what are they doing? This is crazy. Why would I try to use these screws? They're not even relevant to this. And if we do this is what we do with our spiritual life. It's just no, I want to do this over here because I think it might be a good idea. So the point of the Lam Rim and the point of the teachings of the masters of the past is that they have been checked and verified to work. And so they, centuries and thousands of years of masters saying, no, we've done it, it works, you do it, it'll work. Okay? So like that. And all the parts have to be there, it won't work. And the same is true with a spiritual career. If all the elements are not there, it just won't work. Okay? And unfortunately with spiritual things it's more difficult because it's much more slippery and it's much more subtle. If you're putting your IKEA shelves together and there's a spare shelf, it's obvious. Or you've missed 3 bolts and the thing falls down, it's obvious, right? With spiritual things, it's much more subtle. If you're not doing certain spiritual things, you're not going to necessarily notice. It's not going to necessarily be obvious to you, right? So, hard to tell if you're making progress, hard to know which parts you need, hard to know which parts you don't need, because what we're undertaking is a very subtle thing and a very invisible thing. Much of what we're talking about with spiritual things are invisible. They're ideas, they're attitudes, they're internal shifts and internal changes, which are not apparent at all and not obvious at all, right? So, much harder to know if what you're doing is working or not. So, half the things that we have to do to get to enlightenment are not obvious, they're invisible. Especially when you get to the higher levels of practice into tantric teachings and more refined teachings, most of what we're working with is extremely subtle and invisible. And to know if it's working or not really requires guidance, right? So it's very difficult for me to look at someone and say, oh, you're making spiritual progress. Right? I can see from the way that you're standing that you've reached a realization. It's not like that, And so it really requires someone who can do that, which we're going to talk about. But there are so many invisible processes and so many unmeasurable things that it's almost impossible to reach enlightenment unless you're following the instruction manual. It's not a self-directed kind of thing. If it was just a random self-directed thing, it'd be a lot easier, I suppose. But we have this situation where holy beings who are omniscient have said, do these things and you'll get these results, right? And they have to come in the right order, and they all have to be there. Okay, so we have to come up with someone who can teach us those things, and who can give us feedback on how we're doing and what we're doing and whether it's working or not. Right? We have to come up with someone who can judge from our external behavior and our external life, whether we're practicing appropriately spiritually and whether we're making progress spiritually. By observing the way we talk, by observing the way we act, they can give us feedback upon how we're doing. So this omniscient being named the Buddha put together this outline called the Lam Rim. The Lam Rim wasn't created by Tibetans. It's not a Tibetan Buddhist thing. It comes from Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which were spoken by the Buddha. Right? And so the idea of the Lam Rim is you have to go through it all in order with all the parts there, or it won't work. And the only way you'll know it didn't work is you'll die before you get enlightened. You'll come to the end of this life and you'll die and you won't become enlightened. The goal of Buddhist practice is to become enlightened before you die. And that is the stated intent of Buddhism, is to reach paradise, hopefully in one life. And so the proof is in the pudding. Are we becoming happier and happier and happier, more and more pure? And are we moving closer to paradisical existence, right? And if we are, then our practice is working, and if we're not, then something's missing, right? Something's not there. So the Buddha's taught the Lam Rim, and so the point is to learn it thoroughly, because if you do it in order without leaving anything out, then you must get enlightened, right? So it's just like that. Do it all, and you will become enlightened, right? And if you really want to speed it up and you really want to supercharge it, then you move on to the advanced secret teachings of Buddhism, the tantric teachings of Buddhism, which are based upon the Lam Rim and the open teachings. Right? All the advanced teachings of Buddhism are based upon Lam Rim and the other open teachings. Right? So the Lamrim we're going to study is called Yunten Shigirma, which there are a lot of Lamrims. This one's fairly famous, and it's a book about the source of all of the subtle, invisible good qualities that we need to develop inside ourselves, right? You know, if you study dance, or if you're an athlete, you know, you can learn all the mechanical things. You know, move your arms like this, move your legs like this, turn like that, jump and run like that. And so it takes a long time. You know, it'll take 5, 10, 15 years to learn all the pieces so that you can put them together, right? And then you're a competent performer. When we're doing this, the person who's teaching you, when we're studying the Lam Rim and we're engaging in spiritual practices, the person who's teaching you has to be able to gauge how you're doing with all the invisible things which you're trying to develop, right? With your way of thinking, with your inner spiritual body, and with your subtle view of the world. So the person who teaches you has to be able to look at you and say, oh, you know, they know how to get yelled at without going into reaction. They've mastered certain steps of the path, right? You know, they've figured out that the teacher doesn't always mean what they say, and they know how to handle that, and they've mastered certain other realizations and certain other understandings. They've figured out how to make decisions on their own and do the right thing, regardless of what other people are saying, or regardless of what their teachers are saying. So we have to figure out, there are many, many things. There are so many things that we have to learn which are not obvious to us, that it requires a master teacher to help us. Someone who can help us learn what we don't know. I mean, most of the time we don't even know what we don't know, if that makes sense. You know, it's like we don't know that we're lacking X, Y, and Z, you know, because it's not even on our radar. It's not even in the scope of our consciousness. It's not even in the scope of our way of thinking to know that we're missing X, Y, and Z, you know. And so it's totally necessary to have someone who can point out, you know, if you want to be good at this, you are missing 3/4 of what you need, and you don't even know what it is, right? So it's extremely important to come to find someone who can do that, who can see the subtle signs, to gauge where we are in our spiritual practice and what stages we've attained, and what we're missing, and what, you know, what we need. So someone has to guide us through all the stages of our practice, and it's really a race against time, because if we're trying to get enlightened before we die, then there is a deadline. You know, it's like a project at work. You know, you get a project and there's a deadline, right? Well, this is a project and there's a deadline. You know, the deadline is your death. Okay, and the project is to get enlightened before you reach the deadline. So, you know, it's very serious business, and it's very serious work. So we need a guide who is going to guide us through all the stages that we have to go through, and who's pushing us at just the right speed to overcome our obstacles and our spiritual limitations, right? And so that's the teacher, you know, or a lama, you know, if you want to call it that. You know, we need to find a teacher who is, you know, moving us ahead at all possible speed towards our goal, and pointing out to us along the way, you're missing this and you're missing that, and you're doing this well and you're doing that well, right? So, and that's the name. That's what the name, the source of all my goodness, means. The source of all my goodness refers to the teacher or to the lama. So the title of this text is actually named after the lama or the teacher. The lama or the teacher is the source of all my goodness, right? So you have this holy being who is the source of all my goodness. I mean, literally, this person is the source of all my goodness. They're saying to me, if you want to be a good person, stop doing that and do this. You know, study these things, practice these things, stop doing those things. If you want to be a good person, if you want to become a holy person, if you want to become an enlightened person. So the teacher is quite literally the source of all my goodness. Right? If they're an appropriate teacher, which we're going to talk about, right? So, so if it's the case that we need a teacher, we need someone who knows more than we do, who can instruct us, someone who has a much higher spiritual evolution than we do. If it's the case that there is such a person, then we have to go out and find them. We have to go out and try to make a connection with them, right? I mean, if you want to be the best dancer, you find a great dance teacher. You know, if you want to be the best athlete, you find the best coach, right? And it's not just something where you just say, hi, how are you? Can we talk for 15 minutes at a cafe? And then I'll know everything I need to know and I'll be done, right? I mean, if you want to be a great performer, you know, you have a long-term relationship with a coach, right? I mean, if you're going to be an athlete, you know, you see the same coach, you know, every day, 10 hours a day for 10, 20, whatever, you know, however many years it is. And then you get to be really good because you develop a really close relationship with this person. This person sees you every day, you know, however long every day. They see your behavior, they know the subtleties of your behavior, they know your ins and outs and your ups and downs, and they know when you're on and they know when you're off, and they can make the corrections that are necessary, right? So spiritual things are very similar, they're analogous to worldly things. If you want to be a great performer in worldly things, you have a coach who's there with you, putting in a lot of hours over a long period of time, right? Exact same thing with a spiritual teacher, okay? Lama, whatever you want to call it. You know, if you want to get really good at spiritual things, then you need to have that spiritual coaching relationship with someone, whomever that person is, right? And they need to know you over a long period of time, and they need to be around you a lot, and they need to be saying, and they need to be seeing you and giving you the necessary feedback on an extended, ongoing basis, right? So it's like that. And you have to find somebody that fits you, right? The first step of the Lam Rim, the first step of every spiritual path is to find an appropriate teacher, right? You're not going to become a concert pianist not knowing anything about, you know, what a beautiful piece sounds like. It's not possible to say, I want to perform, you know, Mozart's whatever, you know, never having heard it and not knowing how to play a piano, right? I mean, it's the same thing with enlightenment. It's not possible to say, I want to become enlightened, not knowing what it looks like, and, you know, not knowing the steps and the parts and the pieces to execute to, you know, to achieve it. I mean, it's impossible, right? So the first step in becoming enlightened is finding a master teacher, just like anything else you would engage in the world, right? So can't overestimate the importance of it and what it means, and you have to find someone that fits you. You know, if you find a teacher, you know, if it's your music teacher and you just don't get along and you can't learn from them, then there's no point. It's not a productive relationship, and it's the wrong relationship, right? And the same thing is true of spiritual teachers. It's not a one-size-fits-all arrangement. Certain people mesh, certain people don't mesh. And you have to find the person that you mesh with.
I have a question. So, like, to just continue with the analogy you're making to the material world and like training for 10 hours a day to be a prima ballerina or whatever. It seems that that type of relationship with a teacher in the context of Buddhism, like, can only really exist in like a monastery or something. Like, how, unless
I mean, only the monks are pure. Oh no.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying like the exposure, the amount of exposure that you get to a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, how do you spend enough time around somebody, right?
Well, I mean, it's not that I don't want to do that, but it just seems like it's not feasible right now. So what would your suggestion be for people who maybe don't see a teacher, maybe they have a teacher but they don't see them? I feel like I hear about people who have like their heart teacher and then they see them like twice a year. So how do you get those types of corrections? Or is it like you carry that one sentence they said to you for the whole year and like apply it to everything?
Yeah. You have to seek out a very personal relationship with the teacher ultimately. And, you know, we're going to talk about, that's what we're talking about tonight, and we'll go into it. But, you know, ultimately, you have to seek out a very personal relationship with the teacher because they have to be giving you feedback on an ongoing basis on very subtle things, you know, on a regular basis. Presuming one is practicing seriously, obviously. I mean, if one is not practicing seriously, then who cares? You know, I mean, if so we're gonna talk about it. You know, there are different levels of relationship and different levels of practice, which you know we're going to go into. But that's your first job, you know, and that's the first line of the text. That's the first line of the Long Thing Shihirma is you have to find the right person. You have to go out and find the right relationship with the right person, and you have to establish that relationship, right? So, you know, when you sit down and meditate, you know, should I just watch my breath and try to be calm and let, you know, whatever thoughts go through my head and watch them? No. You know, you do a review meditation. You sit down and you think about, do I need a teacher? You know, you review this idea, review these principles. You know, is it important for me to have a spiritual teacher or not? You know, what should that relationship look like? How important is it? You know, how often do I need to see them? You know, do I need to see them? You know, can they be a twice-a-year teacher? You know, and so this is the object. This is how you meditate. You know, this is why this is the steps of the path to enlightenment. This is why this is the instruction manual to get enlightened. And the first point is you're not going to get very far on your own. If you want to make meaningful practice, find somebody to guide you, find somebody to teach you, find somebody to instruct you, and get close to them and spend time around them. And so it's really critical. And so you do that review meditation, you know, and you get clear in your own mind about it. And you just think, should I care or shouldn't I care? Is it important or isn't it important? How far out of my way do I go? How much do I inconvenience myself? You see, that's review meditation, right? I mean, if we don't get clear in our minds, we're not going to do anything. I mean, really. You know, most of us live in a state of busyness and ambiguity and lack of clarity, and we don't really typically get to a place of, I have to do this. This is the most important thing, and I have to do this. And this comes before everything. And all the other things, less important. Less time, less energy, less effort. Stop doing this, stop doing this, stop doing this, go do that. Most of us don't live like that, right? It's much more nebulous and vague and floaty and fluffy, I think. So that's the point here, right? Is we have to get clear, right? So first thing we have to do is go and find a teacher, right? Well, you know, first you do the review meditation to review all the points that are made of why you need to find a teacher. And after you've done that, then you can switch over to analytical meditation. Is it true? You know, does it stand to reason? Does it follow? You know, and so this is why, you know, we engage in these different meditative modes, if you will, right? To bring clarity to our mind, right? And it's a debate within our own mind. We're debating ourselves on this subject, right? So, you know, how do I get onto the next stage, right? How do I get onto the next subtle spiritual stage? Do I need somebody, right? Is it enough to go to class once in a while, right? I mean, might I die before I go to the next class, right? I mean, hey, life expectancy is now 80 or 79 or whatever it is. You know, I got a long time. Maybe it's possible I might not die in an unspecified time. I can live to the statistical mean, you know. Maybe I don't have to rush, right? So, I mean, this is the point of meditation, is to go through all this and to bring clarity to one's mind, right? So that's the first step of long room meditation, is thinking about finding a Lama. And that means establishing a relationship where they are monitoring you closely and giving you ongoing regular feedback, right? So it's not an accident that people become great performers. You know, they have coaches, they have long hours of practice with teachers and instructors and coaches, and they have those relationships, right? So, you know, when you look for a teacher, you know, first thing you do is you check them out, right? Are they a good dance teacher, or do they just train mediocre dancers? You know, are they a good sports coach, or do they just, you know, do the B team? You know, so one of the first things we have to do when we go looking for a teacher is check them out, evaluate them and say, what's their status, how good are they, right? Are they the kind of teacher that I want, right? And it's not just with mundane things and worldly things, it's with spiritual things, right? So you got to think really clearly about what you want to evaluate a teacher. You have to have a very clear idea in your mind of what it is you're after if you're going to evaluate a teacher, right? You have to decide if they're qualified or not. So, if you learn to play the piano badly, it's not going to kill you, But if you have a spiritual teacher who trains you poorly, you will die and you won't reach enlightenment in this life. So much more serious, much more substantial, much more important, right? There are lots of incompetent teachers. People in your own life. You had a teacher. Your 6th grade teacher was amazing and brilliant, and your 7th grade teacher was incompetent and not very good. And it's like that with everything. So don't just think because somebody's wearing a certain costume or colors of clothes or a certain culture or a certain haircut or whatever it might be that they're some kind of great teacher. They're just people in clothes with a haircut, from a country of origin. And you really have to check the person out. You have to see, what is their skill set? What is their performance capacity? How far have they gotten in their own practice and their own spiritual attainments and realizations, right? So, very important, all right? And typically, we meet somebody, we get excited, and we get to know them a little bit, and it's just like, oh, they're not very good after all. And it's, it's part of the process. It's not like, maybe it would be, but, not the first person you bump into who's giving, spiritual teaching is not necessarily going to be your teacher, not teacher, right? The one that you resonate with. So, your mental real estate is very precious, and you have to be careful, Your mental real estate is much more precious than your physical real estate, Your mind is much more important than your body. And we don't typically live that way. Being exposed to wrong ideas can result in lifetimes of problems. Having someone train us incorrectly in spiritual things can waste lifetimes, right? If we mess up our body, it's one lifetime, right? But our mind is very easily impressed, and a person who's not qualified can subtly affect the mind and how it thinks and how it functions to really delay our spiritual progress and our spiritual evolution so that we don't make progress for years. And so we have to be really careful about who we open our spiritual real estate up to. Who you open your spiritual real estate to is much more important than what you do with your form. Okay, and very important to think that way. All right. So someone can take you in the wrong direction for a long time, and according to Buddhism, it can ruin you for lifetimes. And so, if someone is teaching you to think wrong, then you're in trouble. So, very important to check them out. You don't want to take wrong spiritual ideas into your mind and make them part of your being, right? The point, from a Buddhist perspective, our goal is to become pure, holy beings reaching a state of enlightenment, right? And so that's a very subtle and a very delicate thing. And better to follow the instruction of holy beings than people who aren't, right? Okay. So, we don't typically have this kind of attitude towards teachers here in the West. We go to high school, we go to college, my daughter's in 6th grade now, and they change every 40 minutes, they change teachers, So it's like, oh, I have a math teacher, and then I have a social studies teacher, and I have a science teacher. And there isn't this long established relationship, right? And so in our culture, the notion of having a teacher for years is really not endemic, I suppose you'd say. And so we really need to change the way we approach it, and we need to change the way we think about it. So we have to think of the teacher in a certain way. In an ordinary life, you say that I guess the highest commitment one would make is getting married, perhaps, saying, "Oh, I'm going to stay with this person through thick and thin, and I'm committed to them, and I'm going to think about them a certain way, no matter how it goes, I'm committed to them, right? With a teacher, it's the same idea, but magnified 100-fold. You know, it's a very high relationship, and it's a very special relationship. And there's a certain kind of commitment that one makes after you check them out for an appropriate period of time. And that could be a year, or 2 years, or 5 years. You know, and I mean, in Tibet, in ancient Tibet, in modern Tibet, it would be the case where people would spend 5, 10 years checking a teacher out. You know, check out all their students, check out all their teachings, check out how they live, check out everything about them over a very long period of time before being comfortable to say, okay, I'm going to give my mind to this person. You know, because giving your mind to someone is a very heavy thing, right? So you have to take your time checking them out because your life is at stake. Multiple lifetimes are at stake. But once you've checked them out, then you've got to make a commitment in your mind. There's a certain kind of commitment you have to make in your mind. And you have to decide that they're the one. You know, you get to this place where it's just like, you know what, they're the one. I've checked them out. I've thoroughly analyzed it. I've thoroughly evaluated it. I've decided they're the one for me. They're my teacher, right? This is the person who's going to teach me everything I know, everything I need to know to become enlightened, right? And then once you start thinking of them in that way, there's a samaya there. There's a certain karmic connection or bond which is formed, and you can never, should and could never think of them. Right? Should never think of them in any other way. Once you decide this person is a highly evolved spiritual being who's going to lead me out of suffering to enlightenment, then that's a commitment you made in your own mind towards them. Right? You've established a certain kind of relationship with them, like being married, but 100 times more, which goes from lifetime to lifetime, and which is much more profound than getting married and much more impactful than getting married. It's saying, like, this is the holiest being I've ever met, and I'm opening my mind to them, and they're the one who's going to be the source of all my good. This is the person who's going to lead me to every goodness, to develop every goodness in myself, and to eliminate every negativity in myself, right? So you have to think about them as being the person that's going to save your life and never stop thinking of them that way, right? It's like, out of all the people I've met in this world, this is the person that I believe has that capacity, right? And if you don't think that they have that capacity, then don't make that connection. Don't make that kind of commitment and relationship in your mind. Don't make them your teacher with a capital T, right? So this is a very powerful thing to say, I'm entering into a relationship, I am engaging with this person in this way, and I'm committed to engaging with this person in this way, you know? So once you do that, then an interesting thing happens. And it happens in all things in life, but it's important to talk about it, it's important to point it out. So you meet a wonderful person, right? It's like, let's say your boyfriend or your girlfriend, you're dating, right? And you're like, I met such a fantastic person, oh my God. And like, so you meet them and you're like, wow, I want to go out with that person. This person is fantastic, this person is amazing, right? And then you go out with them and it's fantastic and amazing, and then, then you have your first argument, right? And then at some point you have your second argument. Then, you have a third argument. And a fourth argument. And then after a while, they're not so amazing anymore, right? And then it's like, you see somebody else, and it's like, wow, they look perfect. They're the one. They were the one, but they're not the one. They're the one, right? And so, that's how our life works, right? With everything. Every good thing that we come to wears out and changes, and then we want the next good thing. Right? And I think we've all been through it. But what happened, Did this person just change over the 6-month period? They went from wow, spectacular to a dud over the 6-month period or whatever it is. Did somehow they change? Like they were amazing and now they're not amazing? They're the same person they were, But something changed. my perception changed. Our perception changes, right? Our position changes. Our way of thinking about them changes. Why? Because the karma was out. We have a karma to meet an amazing person or an amazing being, whether it's for dating or teaching, or marrying or whatever the case may be. And then, the karma wears out. The karma to have that perception and to have that experience wears out, right? So our mind changes, right? I mean, the karma to see them as beautiful is used up. When is it used up? Every moment that you're seeing them as beautiful. Every perception, every moment of perception of seeing a person as amazing is the consumption of that karma. Every moment that we're seeing an amazing teacher or an amazing partner, karma is being consumed and used and ending, right? And so, that's course 5, we haven't gotten to it yet. The only way to perpetuate that kind of relationship is to continue to collect karma. If we don't continue to collect new karma, to have an amazing person, partner, teacher, right, then we won't. Yeah.
I was just going to say, because can't you answer it.
Well, yeah, but do we? You can.
Right.
I mean, of course we can collect the karma to have a wonderful, extended, nicely perpetuated relationship with, our date or our partner or our teacher, right? But we tend to not. And so it tends to fade out, right? And the same thing happens with a spiritual teacher as it happens with dating or marriage or anything else, You meet a spiritual teacher and it's like, oh my God, they're the one, and then you start to study with them and you start to engage them and you start to see that they pick their nose, and they get headaches and, and they're cranky sometimes and, they like someone more than you and on and on and on and on, right? So the karma is wearing out, right? It's like, my last lama was better than this lama. I need to go find a new lama, right? And so, it's very possible to just bounce from teacher to teacher that way, right? It's not about the teacher, right? It's about us. And it's about our positioning, right? So we can go on skipping from lama to lama, but it isn't going to solve the problem of our karma wearing out, right? So we have to fight that. Our karma is wearing out and our karma is shifting. We have to fight that. And so that is implicit in making a commitment to a teacher, right? It's saying, look, I've met a teacher, the best thing I've ever seen in my life in terms of virtue and holiness and goodness and all of those things. And I am creating samaya, I am making a commitment with them that I'm going to be in spiritual relationship with them. And, some karma is going to get burned up, some karma is going to get worn out. But I have to continue, I have to stay in the relationship and I have to remain committed to the relationship because they are the source of all my good qualities. You have to think that they are the one who is training, me to eliminate my negativities and to develop my goodness, right? Everything they do after you make that commitment will be a challenge to you. Once you make the karmic connection with the other person, it's like everything changes. If you need to learn patience, they'll constantly piss you off. If you have jealousy issues, they'll constantly make you jealous, right? If your faith needs to be tested, they'll constantly test your faith. If they think you have anger issues, they'll constantly, push those buttons. So you have to think, okay, this is my spiritual teacher, putting me in touch with my issues and my afflictions so that I can clean them up and get rid of them, right? And that has to be the whole attitude once you make that karmic connection with the teacher, right? You have to have a whole different way of looking at the person, and they're unlike anyone else you're in a relationship with or anyone else you've met. And so this is a very high practice to say everything that they're doing to bring out my good qualities and to eliminate my negative qualities, right? And it's a very high spiritual practice. It's a high tantric practice, right? It's a very, very heavy practice. And if you can succeed in that, then you can get enlightened in one lifetime, right? So you're deciding that they're the one person in the world who can read your mind, who's omniscient, who knows your future, and knowingly they're challenging you every moment of the day, right? They're trying to get you enlightened. Every time they yell at you, every time they say something that you don't like, every time they say something that was the opposite of what they said yesterday, they are intentionally trying to train your mind and train your capacity, right? And that's what their job is, right? I mean, that's what and your attitude has to be, they're testing me constantly and I'm going to work to pass every test. I'm going to work to eliminate my negativity and develop every positive way of thinking within myself. And that's a successful relationship with a teacher, with a lama, right? It wouldn't be a successful relationship if that wasn't going on. If it wasn't difficult, it wouldn't be a spiritual relationship. Their job is to try to move you along as quickly as possible along the spiritual path, which means getting rid of your negativities and developing your good qualities, right? Source of all my good, right? So, they're finding your faults and bringing them up and smashing them. It's like like knocking all the rough edges off of a stone to polish it and make it smooth and beautiful. Our ordinary personality, are all the rough edges, of jealousy and anger and all the rest, right? Those are all of our rough edges, and they're constantly, knocking those edges off, and it's not a pleasant experience, and it's not an easy or fun experiences, right? So, their job is to constantly push our buttons and bring up our issues so that we fix them. Which is what kids and children do, but we don't have the same attitude. You could have the same attitude with your kids, you could have the same attitude with your partner, but taking a teacher is saying, this is the one person in my life, this is the one person in this world where I'm going to have this special attitude and relationship with, where my central focus is that their job is to bring me up. Their job is to, help me clean myself up, clean out my negativities and develop my good qualities. They're the source of all my good, right? They kept constantly pushing us forward and constantly pushing us up, but not too hard, not so hard that we're going to crash and burn, right? They want us to get there as fast as possible, and so it's a very delicate relationship. It's a very subtle thing, because they're pushing, but never so much that meaningful damage is done, yeah.
Can you speak at all about some personal experience within a teacher? I just keep wondering about people in the class that have sort of personal experience.
Yeah.
Can you just...
Sure. Like what?
I don't know, just something about...
Like an example, you mean?
Yeah, like did that happen, with you?
Sure.
Did one of those, 50 things you just mentioned, 50 challenges you just mentioned.
Shall I use my children or my wife or a spiritual teacher? I could say
Well,
pick any of them, Yes. Just in a practical sense, there are many examples. Holy Geshe Michael, when he was here living in New York, he was constantly late for appointments. Constantly blowing off students because, he'd be like, yeah, I'll meet you at this time. Yeah, I'll meet you at this time. Yeah, I'll meet you at this time. Then he wouldn't show up, or he'd show up late, and you'd bug the crap out of me, because I believe in being punctual. And so, I would say to him, I'd say, look, this is wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. You're telling people things. You're effectively lying to them. You're misleading them. It's not respectful. I'd say, with all due respect, I don't think this is appropriate. I don't think you're treating people properly. And of course, I can't read your mind, and I have no idea what your motivation is, and blah 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 blah. But I don't think you should be doing this.
Was that before or after you accepted him as, before or after you gave him your mind?
Well, should I use those terms?
I like that phrase. I haven't heard it before. But because I know that in the Lamrim it does also discuss, right, addressing if there are any issues, but then it's kind of like, are you saying no, this isn't a teaching?
No, not at all. Not at all. There's a lot to say around it. I think it's getting late. Let's take a break. I'll just keep looking at the clock. Let's take a break, and then we'll pick up there when we come back, all right? So I want you to have a break. So, this sort of leads us into the whole next section, which is how do you go about doing what we're talking about in a practical way. So have a little break, 5-minute break.